Right.
Thanks so much for making the time to do it, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
A total pleasure. Nice to be with you.
I guess I want to start by asking what is it's very hard for me to not think about the whole time I'm watching the film, which is mirrors to today or any time, I guess, in politics, perhaps social change, but maybe we're always in states of upheaval, but it just feels like there's a constant message of trying to affect change in their behavior in this time period for John and Yoko. And
I think there is, but I think more than that, I think that there are incredible echoes of today. In fact, you might even say it feels like we're kind of going through exactly the same tumultuous period, but also so many things, in this film. When we finished this film, Trump, nobody had tried to shoot Trump, but obviously there's George Wallace being shot in this film. There was nobody, there was no black woman running for president. There the Gaza protests were happening on the campuses, whatever. But so many things in this film, you realize, is American politics highly unoriginal and just on a 50-year loop? Maybe there's something very strange going on.
I
Either
no,
that, either that, or somehow this is like the plot of some weird Star Trek movie where actually I've made a film which then the world is copying. I don't know which one it is.
well, that's why I'm glad you cut me off because I probably would have continued to ramble because it's so baffling to me that it's like I was like, what's happening right now? Like
It
it's
is,
like
it is, it is like that. And it was baffling to me because I said we didn't set out to do that, but it seems to have just happened that we've gone down some weird John Lennon wormhole that's led to everything in the world being changed in the shape of 1972. But no, I didn't set out to make a political film, but it is now a very political film and a very topical film. Um, but it's you're absolutely right. It is about what happens when you're one of the most famous people in the world. You're John Lennon. You're just after the Beatles. Everybody knows you. Everybody loves you. What do you do with your life? And how do you lead a life where you can try and change the world for the better? And he really took that to heart. He's 31 years old, incredible, so young. He's been in the greatest band of all time. And now he is starting on chapter two. And chapter two, as far as he's concerned, is I want to understand how to be a better person. And part of that is becoming a feminist. And the other part of it is I want to learn how to use my celebrity to change the world for the better. And he and Yoko go on this kind of crusade in a way to, get involved in so many causes, to be activists, to be out on the street. But in the end, it fails because Nixon is reelected and everyone knows that he's corrupt and everyone knows that Watergate is brewing and about to blow up. But he's reelected in a landslide, the biggest landslide of any American president ever. Sorry, Donald. That's true. You're nowhere near. Yeah, he won every state except one. Incredible.
yeah.
And then a year later is forced to resign. But so in the end, John and Yoko had the last laugh, but they were defeated, and it really affected everything that happened in their lives after that. The huge effort they put into this politically, but it felt like it didn't work.
And there's this that's part of the painfulness of watching it is the cyclical nature, the failure that they even talk early on about the apathy of young people.
Mm.
And they talk about the flower thing not working, obviously, and they're like, "Well,
Yeah,
we're gonna try
yeah,
again."
flower
And
power.
you're
Yeah.
sitting there watching it, and you're just like, "Oh man, like I
This
don't
isn't
have
gonna
the."
end. This isn't gonna end well. But
But
I
we're
think
also
that
like sitting in it again now. Like I'm curious the perspective. Like I'm an American, and I've
yeah,
lived my whole life here,
yeah.
and I even remember the Reagan. Like, this stuff keeps happening. But like, I'm curious your perspective. If you connect with John's to some degree, it's kind of like it's remarkable that he was on top of the world at 31 and he was like, you know what I want to do? Every time I see something that feels like injustice, I'm putting all my energy there. That's just
Yeah.
crazy, you know?
It is crazy, and I think particularly when you consider how celebrities generally behave, particularly today. Yes, they can care about a cause, but that just means posting on Instagram. It doesn't mean being on the streets in the rain, making a speech, donating money. All of they really were, and it was causes which are just the same kind of causes around now. There's a lot about race, there's a
Mm.
lot about the environment, which I didn't actually put in the film, but this is a period of first period of real concern over the state of the environment and the rivers in America and that kind of thing. Um, and then, of course, feminism, which is a big part of this, and John's journey from being a kind of tough, rough probably misogynistic working
He has
class
some dark stuff
guy.
in his past with that.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's moving and he's trying to say, I want to be a better person, and being a feminist is a better thing. And actually, I want to recognize that. So the footage of him at the first international feminist conference with Yoko is incredible to me. So you've got this macho guy, the only man in the room with all these hardcore feminists, and he's there to listen and to play second fiddle. He's not there to like, tell them I'm a great feminist. He's there to sort of learn. And I think that is something, yeah, remarkable. He's so open. He's so not about ego. He really isn't. And so there's so many admirable qualities about him. You could say that sometimes he comes across as like grumpy and bossy, and sometimes he's naive and particularly politically very naive. But there's an integrity and an authenticity about him and an openness to the world that's really inspiring.
Yeah, and despite the hardship of experiencing this film, which is it reminds us of these cycles of trying and failing essentially to
Yeah,
make it a better world and a better place. And I want to
yeah,
ask you another thing about the movie. It's obviously it's a documentary. It really sinks us into the media of the time. We're flipping the
yeah,
stations, we're watching TV, and
yeah,
I was wondering, today we live in a different variation on that. I feel like our phone scrolls is our modern, like just turn the TV on and let it wash over you. And there's this beautiful section where you have the camera go across the bed and it's with
yeah,
the kids and the TV, and then boom, the
yeah,
picture of them. Beautifully
yeah,
done. And I'm
yeah.
curious, how do you feel about drawing the connection? Like it seems so innocent. Oh, they were watching TV all day. But to what we do now, which feels more.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's the same thing. John said, and it's like I put this at the beginning of the film, where he said, TV's the window on the world, and it's like the fireplace. We sit around and say we used to sit around the fireplace. Now we sit around the TV, and he used to have it on even, with no sound on, just in the background. And it's how he learned. He learned about the country, but I also remember, I grew up in the UK. I had an American grandmother, and I used to come here a lot of my vacations. And coming from the UK, where there were three TV channels, and they were state controlled, and they were only broadcasting 6 or 7 hours a day. And at the end of the day, they played the national anthem, and they went to black. Um, and it was very, it was a serious business. And then you come to America. Holy cow! There's 180 channels of a cavalcade of chaos and religion and cartoons and all this stuff. And you're like sitting there in your bed going, jing, jing. I mean, I remember that feeling vividly. And I think he experienced exactly that same thing. And obviously, you're not seeing every aspect of America. You're seeing
Sure.
probably the crazy end, but you are experiencing the country and what people are thinking. So, and it's exactly like scrolling TikTok or something. And I think that I wanted to one of the ways I was sort of influenced by that, I think, is that I didn't want to put captions up saying this is who this person is, that's who that, because in a way that's not how we experience the world. It's not how we experience social media. You're just like, oh, here's some random guy, chugging, 3 liters of Coca-Cola and
Yeah.
whatever he's doing. You're seeing that, and then you're going to somewhere to China where somebody's doing something, and then you're going to be, you don't know who these people are, you don't know what the context of them, and that's kind of similar to the experience of flipping through the TV channels back then.
Yeah, and you're being just washed over with this information. And
Yeah,
and I like that the movie reminds us that that is not an entirely new phenomenon to today. We're just doing it in a different pattern, maybe. You've made a lot of period drama. You've done it in a lot
yeah,
of different ways. You've done
yeah,
things that are like way back. You've done things from more in the last century. You did
yeah,
alternate history with Stephen King. Like I'm kind of
yeah,
curious,
yeah,
like
yeah,
this is documentary. So you've kind
yeah.
of played in all this. I'm curious for you to talk a little bit about revisiting other eras through, through the lens, basically, and like how how today impacts what you're doing, every time.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, in a way, my real impulse to make this film was as a filmmaker. I wanted to make a film of the kind I hadn't seen before, which is one which, it's like you go to somebody's house when they die, and the artifacts that are lying around, you got a couple of old love letters, you've got some photos on the wall, you've got, the choice of books that they had, whatever music they were playing. And you make it, you try and understand who they are from those artifacts, the
Mm,
things that are left behind of us. And that's what I wanted to do with this film. Is kind of like, okay, so none of us can ever really know what John and Yoko were like.
mm.
The closest we can get is looking at the bits of them that are left behind, which is mostly, you know, them talking, the archive, what they were looking at, whatever, whatever. And I thought, instead of trying to sort of come up with my own thesis of who they are and then, you know, interview people and get people to, it's just like, let's just present all those bits, the things that are left behind, which you're not pretending this is everything. You're not saying this is, explains every aspect of them, but you're taking all the interesting little shards of a life, the shards that are left behind, and you're saying, how do I make a film out of these? And that to me is just, the filmmaker was a really, having made a lot of documentaries about different individuals, remember, that was just to me like a bit of a revelation of kind of like, I'm not trying to say everything. I'm talking about one little period in their life, one concert, just this archive that happens to exist in a few cardboard boxes, and let's see what it says and how much it's a microcosm of not just their lives, but of that period.
I want to ask you more about that as it applies to fiction too, but because it's
Mm,
interesting to do less that implies more always feels more
mm,
effective somehow. But I wanted
mm.
to highlight that the phone calls are incredible. And
They
like
are fantastic. They make the film in a way because, I only got those phone calls about halfway through the edit. And the version that without those would have been a more cerebral kind of art piece in a way, I
Mhm,
think, in a way.
mhm.
And then we got these phone calls. We got phoned up by somebody at the Lennon estate and said, "Oh, we've just found this box. It says phone recordings, 1972 on it. We don't know what it is. It's a bunch of reel-to-reel tapes." And I was like, "That sounds really interesting. Can I have a listen?" So they transferred it all onto digital and sent it over to me, and it was so compelling because you're sitting there listening to hour after hour of their telephone calls
It's just who
that they and
recorded
and
their
and as
did
they
they
recorded them
record?
themselves. They
Wow.
recorded them because they thought that the FBI, I think correctly, they thought the
Mm,
FBI
mm.
were tapping their phones, and so they decided, well, if they're going to record our phones and then maybe use that as evidence against us in some trial or something, we want to have our own record of it. So
Amazing.
they started doing that, and so you get all sorts of crazy stuff. You get hours and hours and hours about all of Yoko's assistants trying to find flies in the middle of winter in New York to
Right.
be some conceptual piece that she wants to do in her artwork. And that's hilarious. So that becomes a sort of running joke through the film. But there was
Yeah.
hours of
She's
that, and then there's
buzzing
lots of
around.
stuff of them talking about how do we get Bob Dylan to go on tour with us,
Yeah.
and all the intricacies of this crazy tale of them trying to persuade this guy AJ Weberman, who's famous for or infamous for going through Bob Dylan's garbage and then exposing all sorts of things about his life. They need to get him to write a letter of apology. I mean, it's so complicated. Him to
Yeah.
write a letter of apology to Bob Dylan so that Bob Dylan will join their concert tour. And you're just thrust into the middle of their lives, and it's like you're sitting on the bed with them while they're making all these calls, and the sort of you get the details that would not normally be in a film because they wouldn't
Yeah.
normally considered to be sort of important enough, but somehow it's the accretion of all those little bits that makes something interesting.
Yeah, no, I
Tells
loved
you.
that. That was very immersive, that stuff, and amazing that you
Yeah,
had it. I want to just before we wrap transition to, there's a giant four movie thing happening about the Beatles,
I
and I'm
do.
curious, I'm curious if you have thoughts about, obviously you haven't seen it or read anything like most of us,
Yeah,
but like,
no,
you've just lived with John in a way. So I'm curious if you have
yeah.
thoughts about fictional representations of John, about John's place, and about the embarking on this and the casting of this and things like that.
Well, you know what? I would have said that most biopics are not, to me, don't work creatively. But there are exceptions, and two great exceptions to me recently are Complete Unknown, the Dylan film. I'm a huge Dylan fan.
Same,
I didn't even want to see the film.
same.
I watched it. I thought that is a great film. Don't want to hear anyone saying against it. Timothy Chalamet is fantastic, and the thematics of the film are kind of a really original. And if you work in the arts at all, you recognize those thematics and they're things it's just really, really interesting, intelligent piece of work. And then I think James Mangold's film about Johnny Cash too is also is another. But there aren't very many of them. Maybe if they're not made by James Mangold, then they're not going to be good. No, I don't want to say I don't. But actually, I have no idea. Sam Mendes is an excellent filmmaker,
Yeah.
and does the world want more Beatles material? Well, having just made another film, I can't really say no, they don't. So, but I think that it's a moot point. And do they want four of those films? I don't know. I think it all depends on how brilliantly they're written. I mean, if they've got something to say and they've got four different things to say, I think it could be great. But it's also just amazing to me that, so the Marvel franchises have seemed to be sort of, the shine has come off Marvel. And so now we've got a new franchise. It's the Beatles franchise.
The
And
classic rock franchise.
the classic rock franchise. And so this is kind of the world we live in, where everything is franchisable. There will be the origin story for Ringo Starr series. That'll be on Disney Plus soon.
Well, I want to thank you for that. It's been really a pleasure. I would go on much longer if I could. I've enjoyed it, and I thought you did an incredible job with this. It's really unique and special. And I didn't know that the world needed more Beatles, but after seeing this, I was like, yeah, it did. It needed that one.
Okay,
So
that's
thank you.
nice to hear. That's a
Okay.
great compliment. Thanks.
Bye,
Nice to
Kevin.
talk to
Thank you
you.
again.
Bye bye.
Likewise.
See you later.